Fiancé stays late at the office, erased a secretive call from his phone. Now I fear wedding guests will witness heartbreak in March. My fiancé and I have been together for 8 years now. Last year, he proposed, and ever since, we've been knee-deep in wedding planning. 2 years ago, something big happened. I was offered my dream job in Singapore. He was my boyfriend then, and he urged me to take the leap. So, we both quit our jobs in Canada and moved halfway across the world together. 5 months later, he landed work for himself in Singapore too. The company he works at is predominantly women, but that never bothered me, at least, not until recently. Things honestly felt great after the move, but earlier this year, everything started to shift. He suddenly became distant. Conversation between us dried up, he was glued to his phone all the time, and intimacy just fizzled. He rarely seems in the mood anymore. At first, I shrugged it off, chalking it up to a possible funk or just stress from work. But over the last 2 months, things have taken an even stranger turn. Now, once or twice a week, he stays late at the office, which is odd because he never used to before. It's suddenly part of his routine. The other night was a tipping point. I tried calling his office phone, no answer. I dialed his cell again, no reply. When he got home, he claimed he didn't notice any calls. But what happened today made me pause. I came home from work to find him already there, mid-conversation on the phone. As soon as he realized I was home, he hurriedly wrapped up the call with a vague "I gotta go." When I asked him who it was, he just said it was work-related. But later that evening, curiosity got the better of me and I checked his phone. There was no record of that call in his recent logs. He had deleted it. Why would he erase just that call? Our wedding is set for March. Friends and family are flying in from all over the globe to be with us. I can't help but wonder, are these signs that he's cheating? Or is it something else I'm not seeing? I keep replaying all the changes, looking for clues. One more detail keeps eating at me. He's always been someone who religiously keeps a journal. It used to be a physical notebook, but now it's a journal app on his phone. Given everything that's been happening, I can't stop wondering if he's written about any of this. If there's something he's hiding, I feel certain it's in that journal. But the thought of going through it feels like violating something sacred. His journal means the world to him. I'm torn about what to do. I keep coming back to this. If I have a concern so deep that I feel I can't just ask my fiancé, maybe that alone is a sign that I need to stop and reassess the whole relationship. We used to be so open, so honest with each other, talking through every feeling and worry that came up. Except this year, it's like he's shut me out. When I ask about his mood, he just brushes me off with a tired "I'm just exhausted," or "it was a long day." I'm left wondering what changed and where we go from here. On the spot, he tried to claim he'd gone to their sister office, but I wasn't about to buy it. I told him I needed the truth, right now. He sat me down and said he could explain. According to him, since we moved here, we've spent every moment together, nights, weekends, everything. Neither of us have really made friends, and he admitted he just wanted some time to himself. He'd been taking a couple evenings a week to get a drink at Clark Quay, or a walk around the city, just being by himself. He said he didn't want to tell me because he thought it would hurt my feelings. I tried to believe him. I told him that, even though I wasn't really convinced. I said that if we were really about to spend the rest of our lives together, we had to trust each other completely, and never feel like we had to hide anything. He agreed, but there was still worry in his eyes. Then I asked if he'd show me his journal. That's when he got really nervous. He said no, that the journal was too personal, even for me. We went back and forth for almost 10 minutes, arguing. Eventually, I gave him an ultimatum: read me those pages, or we're done, because I just didn't think I could ever trust him otherwise. That's when he started to cry. Tears ran down his cheeks. He begged me, said I had to just trust him, that I was the only one he ever really wanted to be with. I gave him one last chance. He looked up at me, eyes full of fear, and said, "I'm afraid of how you'll see me if you read those pages." At that point, I was convinced he was having an affair. I told him we were over and that the wedding was off. I started toward the door, and that's when he stopped me, pressed his phone in my hand, and whispered, "The password is 6248. But I can't be here when you read it." Then he left the house. I'm ashamed to admit how much I read once I unlocked the phone. The truth is, my fiancé has been suffering from depression. He'd been deeply depressed ever since we moved away. He hated his job, felt cut off from everyone at work. He wrote that his coworkers back home had been like family. Now, nothing. One line stuck with me: "It's been so many years since I felt this hollow emptiness." I thought I was done with it, but in a way it's comforting to be depressed again. I no longer have to fear my happy days will run out. At least now I know how I'll feel tomorrow. He wrote that he was completely convinced I'd leave him if he didn't get his depression figured out. And, of course, I found out what he was really doing after work. He'd been going to therapy once a week. Gary still hadn't come home, even after I'd waited 4 hours. I couldn't call him, since I had his phone. So eventually, I called his sister. They're super close. I explained the entire situation to her. She told me she already knew. The two of them had been talking a lot lately. I told her I couldn't understand why Gary didn't trust me enough to come to me about all of this. She explained that Gary had struggled with depression since high school. When he was just 17, he came out about his depression to his family. His parents didn't understand, they just told him to cheer up. He lost his girlfriend and some friends, and only his sister stood by him. She explained that when his depression came back in his early 20s, he told his then girlfriend and leaned on her for support. She dumped him soon after. Then, a year later, he met me. She told me that Gary hadn't felt depression in 7 years, and he believed that he was finally going to live a happy life. But after losing his job, his family, and his friends in the last 2 years, the depression came back hard. She said, he doesn't just think you'll leave him if you find out, he knows it. There's no doubt in his mind that you'll leave him when you find out that he's a depressed freak. Those were Gary's words, not hers. I broke down then. I told her I'd call back once I found him. I promised her that I plan to marry this man, and whatever he's dealing with, we'll face it together. He's my forever. My heart shattered over how alone he must have felt. I hated myself, and all the people before me who had hurt him or made him feel like a freak for being depressed. I've never gone through depression myself, but I understand. I want to be there for him always. It's 1:23 a.m. and he's still not home. He must think I'm on the verge of leaving him for good. What do I do? Update 2. He still hadn't come home by 2 a.m. I put his phone and our spare keys in my bag and left. The night air in Singapore feels like someone laid a warm towel over the city, and the streets were this strange mix of quiet and delivery riders. I took a cab to Clark Quay first, because that was the one concrete thing he'd given me to hold onto. I walked the river twice, past tables of drunk tourists and couples sharing fries, checked every bench I could see. Nothing. I called his sister again from his phone and she picked up on the first ring. I told her what I was doing, where I was. She went very calm in the way people do when they're trying not to freak you out, and asked me if there was anywhere here he ever said felt safe. I thought of one place, the seawall at East Coast Park where we sat the first month we moved, just watching tankers blink like floating neighborhoods. I hung up and got another cab. I found him sitting on the rocks near the water with his shoes off, ankles in the dark, his shirt damp with that sticky ocean mist. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just kept staring out past the anchored ships and said, without turning, I didn't know where else to go. I sat next to him and didn't say anything for a little while. Then I put his phone in his palm. He closed his fingers around it but didn't look down. He told me things I wasn't prepared for. He said the therapy I found wasn't the whole story, that his therapist had referred him to a psychiatrist 2 weeks ago and he'd started meds last Friday. I was afraid if I told you when they messed me up, you'd see me as someone broken before we even got the chance, he said. He talked about the side effects already hitting him: nausea, the way intimacy feels like a memory you can't quite reach, and I felt my face burn with the memory of the nights I'd taken that personally and turned quiet and cold. He said the missing call in his logs was the Samaritans of Singapore helpline. He'd been calling more than once. He deleted the calls because he didn't want me to scroll past one night and have my stomach drop the way it did. I was going to tell you once I wasn't scared of your face changing when you looked at me, he said. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he told me his boss had put him on a performance plan last month. If he doesn't hit targets by the end of January, he's out. He hadn't told me because losing this job here doesn't just mean searching for a new position. It means his app would be cancelled and he'd have 30 days to leave the country. I kept thinking, if I fix this first, I save you from all of it. If I can't fix it, at least you don't have to watch me go under. We sat there a long time. The waves were small and mean, slapping at the rocks. I told him, very quietly, that if I had known the full picture, the only thing that would have changed is how quickly I would have been sitting on this exact rock with him. He nodded, and his mouth did that thing where it tries to smile and apologize at the same time. When he finally looked at me, his face was blotchy and raw, and he said, I thought the most loving thing I could do for you was vanish before I wrecked your life. I told him the most loving thing he can do for me is let me in when it's messy, not after it's tidied up and ready for display. We talked about the wedding. I told him I still want to marry him. Not just in March with fairy lights and perfect vows, but right now. We both know what losing his job would mean here. He stared at the water again and said, very softly, are you saying what I think you're saying? And I said I want to do the civil part here as soon as we can at the registry, keep March as our celebration with everyone we love. He put his head in his hands and made this sound I've never heard him make, half laugh, half sob. I don't want you to marry me to save me, he said. I told him I am marrying him because I choose him, with his good days and his terrible ones, with the worst case scenarios and the boring Tuesdays and all of it. The fact that it might also make it easier to stay together in one place isn't a trap, it's strategy. He asked me if this meant he could stop lying about late nights. I told him I want him to have his walks and his hours alone when he needs them. But no more pretending it's work. If he needs space, he can say I'm going to take 2 hours to wander and then I'm coming back, and then he needs to come back. He nodded. I can do that, he said. I want to try. We went home in a cab while the sky was turning the pale, sickly blue of morning. He fell asleep like someone had unplugged him the second his head hit the pillow. I felt the prickle of an incoming cry and went to the kitchen and let the sink run so the sound would cover it, not because I wanted to hide, there was just something about that white noise that made it easier to breathe. Today, he asked me if I'd come to therapy with him. I said yes. We sat on the little sofa together while he told his therapist everything he had told me by the water, and I watched the way his hands moved when he was trying to be brave. His therapist talked about a safety plan and about medication side effects being scary and also not forever. She said it's okay to build a life that accommodates what's real, and it landed somewhere in me with a thud. We talked about his performance plan at work and he agreed to tell HR about the medical leave option his therapist raised he'd been too ashamed to ask. This afternoon, we booked an appointment at ROM for next week. The lady on the phone had the kindest voice and explained the paperwork like we weren't sitting there with our hearts in our throats. We will tell our families after we have the date confirmed. We're going to keep March as our date, to celebrate with everyone, same venue, same everything, just that, technically, we'll already be married. I asked him if that felt okay in his chest and he put his hand over mine and said, it feels like breathing. He took the journal off the coffee table and put it in his backpack before we left for therapy. On the way home he slid it to my side without looking and said, I don't want to hide, but I do want one place that's mine. Can we agree on that? I told him yes. I told him I'm never opening it again, not even if I'm handed the password with a trembling hand. If I need to know, I'll ask. If he needs me to know, he'll tell me. It's late again and he's asleep next to me. I can hear that thick, heavy sleep that comes after a storm breaks. I keep thinking about his bare feet in that black water and how small and stubborn he looked, like a kid refusing to come in from the rain. I don't know how the next few months will unfold. I know they are not going to look like the picture I'd been carrying in my head. But I also know that tonight, when I reached for him, he didn't flinch. He reached back. And right now, that feels like the truest thing. Update 3. We went to ROM on Tuesday and the building felt like a cross between a bank and a chapel. Cold air, low voices, the scuff of shoes on tile. The lady with a kind voice from the phone was real and even kinder in person. She showed us where to sign for the verification, what a statutory declaration looks like when you're both trying not to make your signature shake, and explained again that there's a minimum 21-day wait. Earliest we can solemnize is the 7th, she said, circling the date on a paper calendar with a pencil like she was drawing a gate we just had to walk through. We took the first morning slot. When she asked about witnesses, we looked at each other and both went still because we realized, at the exact same time, that in Singapore we don't have the kind of friend group you text at 11 p.m. to say be my witness. I messaged my work friend Lena. He messaged a woman from his office named May, the same one who had swiped me up to his floor that night. They both said yes within minutes. I put my phone face down because I could feel my throat climb up into my eyes. We told our families that night from the sofa, both of us leaning against each other like the couch had turned into a small boat. My parents cried happy tears and then my mother, very gently, asked if this was because of paperwork, like she was afraid to say the word out loud and spook it. I told her it's because of love and also because of paperwork. Gary held my hand so tightly that my fingers ached in the best way. His sister whooped. His parents were quieter. His mother said, you should fix yourself before you get married, like you tell someone to fix the button on a shirt. He went very still. I said, he isn't broken, and kept my voice so level I surprised myself. We hung up and he breathed like he'd been underwater for 2 minutes and had just cracked the surface. Later, he wrote a message to his parents that I watched him type and delete. He finally sent something simple, we're doing this. It makes me feel safe. I hope you can be happy for us. His dad sent back a thumbs up. His sister sent 6 heart emojis and a row that made his mouth twitch into a real smile. The next morning, HR emailed him a meeting for mid-pay review with his manager and attached a policy on medical leave like a folded handkerchief. We went in together. I waited in the cafe downstairs and pretended to read, my eyes bouncing around the same paragraph 6 times. He came down with his jaw set. "They are putting me on 2 weeks medical leave to stabilize meds," he said, and I watched the way relief and shame fought in his face like 2 birds trapped in a room. His manager had said something about optics, and he'd taken a slow breath and said, "Optics are less important to me than health." HR recommended he switch off Slack except for one person. We went home and he turned off the app. His laptop chimed anyway and he closed it with a soft click, like laying a baby down to sleep. On Thursday he had a bad day that arrived like heat lightning. We were in Entuck and he reached for the dish soap and then just stopped. The shelf in front of him turned into a wall and he slid down it until he was sitting on a linoleum between bleach and paper towels. I crouched with him, knee to knee, and said, "Stay with me." A woman in a pink visor handed me a bottle of water like she'd been waiting for a moment to do something good all day. A little boy in a school uniform put a gummy bear in Gary's open palm and then ran back to his mother, like he'd done a heist. We sat there until his breathing came back in counts of 4. When we stood up, his face was tear shining and he said, "I hate this," with so much flat honesty I could've cracked right in half. I bought the dish soap and the gummy bears. He asked me, that night, if we could make a plan for the mornings because the pills made him nauseous and the shower felt like standing under a waterfall he couldn't control. We moved the alarm 15 minutes earlier. We took the bulb out of the bathroom ceiling light and put a lamp in there instead so it was less like an interrogation. We wrote brush teeth, take meds, small protein, go easy on a sticky note and stuck it to the kettle. It sounds ridiculous to write it out. It felt like putting handrails in a hallway so you don't fall even if you're dizzy. Friday brought a curveball I didn't see coming. His company announced a restructuring during an all-hands and the Singapore office was going to be consolidated into the regional hub by April. His manager sent us a message requesting a quick call. He stared at the words and didn't touch the mouse. "I can't do this and also not do this," he said. He called. I watched his shoulders while he listened. They were telling him there'd be a redundancy package if performance targets weren't met by end of January. If they were, his role would transition to Hong Kong. It was said like a reward. He put them on mute and turned to me, eyes wide. "I can't move to Hong Kong," he whispered, in the tone of someone saying I can't grow gills. He unmuted and asked about remote options. There were none. He said he needed everything in writing. After, he lay on his back on the rug and stared at the ceiling fan like it was a clock counting down. "We have the 7th, I said, and he nodded like he was memorizing a password. Over the weekend we met May and Lena for coffee to thank them and also to quietly vet if we were accidentally asking 2 strangers to carry a very important moment from our lives. May hadn't known he was struggling. She kept folding and unfolding her hands and then finally said, "I thought you were just aloof." "I'm sorry I didn't ask." He said, "I didn't give you anything to ask about," and shrugged in a way I wanted to set on fire. Lena hugged me like we'd been friends a decade and not 1 year. She said, "I have a nice pen for signing. It's my father's. He used it as wrong." I wanted to cry over a pen. The 7th came in with rain that started as mist and turned, in the space of a cab ride, into a downpour that flattened the trees on Fort Canning like a giant had run his hand over them. We got there early because mornings have become where our courage lives. We waited under the overhang with 3 other couples and a toddler in a bow tie who was furious about everything. When they called our names, I felt my knees warm, the way you do when you first step into a hot pool. The room was plain in that way that makes you notice people's faces more than things. Our solemnizer made us each say our full names slowly because, she said with a smile, the last couple had swapped passports. When it was his turn, he took a breath that seemed to vacuum the room and said my name like it was the first line of a song. When it was mine, my voice came out steadier than I expected. The rings were warm from our palms. Lena's father's pen was heavier than it looked and the ink came out dark and immediate. We signed. We were married. May cried, charming ugly tears that made the toddler stop mid-wail to stare. We stood on the steps afterwards, under the awning, and ate curry puffs from a paper bag because Lena's boyfriend had insisted on bringing wedding snacks, and we laughed in that wild, released way that feels like stepping off a treadmill you didn't know was on incline. He bent his head to mine and said, very quietly, "Do you still want March?" I said, "Especially March." He kissed me like he'd been saving that kiss for an emergency. The email from HR hit his inbox that afternoon. Formal notice of impending redundancy if targets aren't met, confirmation of medical leave, a line about outplacement services. He forwarded it to his therapist and to me. We sat at the dining table with 2 laptops and 2 mugs and 5 browser tabs open on the ICA website. We made a checklist for the dependents pass like it was a treasure hunt, marriage cert scan, our passports, my app details, passport photos. Our printer wheezed out pictures where our eyes looked a little too intense. He corrected me on a field I'd misfilled and I looked up and said, "It's infuriating how good you are at forms," and he said, "It's all boxes. I can do boxes." We submitted the application and the small green tick that popped up might as well have been a fireworks show. That night, his sister FaceTimed us and we held the phone above the bowl of soup like we were consecrating it. "Husband and wife," she shouted at the screen, and it surprised me how the words sat in my chest. Heavy and right, like a paperweight keeping things from flying away. 2 hours later, his mother texted him an apology for what she'd said earlier in the week. It was not poetic, and it didn't fix the past, but it had the line, "I don't always understand everything but I love you," and I saw his muscle memory reach for disbelief and then, carefully, set it down. He didn't reply that night. He put the phone face down and reached for my hand and we fell asleep with the rain still shouldering the windows and the aircon clicking on and off like a metronome. There's so much mundane in all of this that feels like a miracle now. He told HR he couldn't make the 8 a.m. call on Wednesday because of therapy and they said of course, and he hung up and blinked, slow. His boss sent him a Slack on Friday at 9:01 a.m. with "We need to talk deliverables," and he didn't answer until 11. When I asked him how it felt not to jump, he said, "Like catching myself on a railing I didn't know was there." We went back to East Coast Park last night because I wanted to stand where it started to bend this direction. The tankers blinked like stubborn planets. We took our shoes off and pressed our feet into the wet sand and I asked him if he had a line for March yet. He said, "I want to say that I love you on the days I don't love anything," and then he flushed like he'd said something indecent and I put my face in his shoulder because that's exactly it. I told him mine is about the sink and white noise and how sometimes loving is just letting the tap run and standing next to someone until they can't breathe again. On the way home a bus splashed a puddle across both our legs and he laughed so hard he had to bend at the waist, hands on knees, like a kid. We were dripping and ridiculous and married. When we got upstairs, there was an email from Micah asking for one more document, a clearer scan of our marriage certificate because the corner was cut off. He groaned. I took the paper, smoothed it flat with my palm like you do with a map, and fed it back through the scanner. We are not out of the woods. The woods, it turns out, are where we live. But there's a path now, and a pen with someone's father's name scratched into the side in careful script, and a small green tick on a website, and a date circled on a paper calendar in pencil that smudged when the rain hit our sleeves and we laughed because we are, somehow, still here. Update 4. The email came at 6:11 a.m. The kind of hour where the city is just stretching and even the birds sound like they're clearing their throats. Subject line, request for interview a DP application. There was a polite paragraph about verification and a slot that same afternoon, like being handed a ticket you didn't know you'd bought. I read it twice and then woke him up with my palm against his shoulder. He blinked hard, sat up too fast, and pressed the heel of his hand to his stomach like he was trying to keep his breakfast where it belonged. We went anyway. The ICA building has that polished chill that makes you suddenly aware of your elbows. Numbers were beeping in a rhythm that didn't match my heart. The officer who called us in had a calm face that felt like a mercy. She asked us to sit on opposite sides of the desk and then, not unkindly, separated us by a question. Which side of the bed does he sleep on? What color is her toothbrush? Who cooks more often? What did you do on your first New Year's Eve in Singapore? He said left. Green, she does. We fell asleep at 11 and the fireworks woke us up. I said left. Green, I ruin eggs less frequently. We were on the HDB corridor with our neighbors and a boy set off a sparkler in a Milo tin. She nodded without giving us anything. She asked him how I take my coffee. He got it right and added, she pretends she likes it black when she's late, but if there's oat milk she'll pour half the carton. I said his tea has to sit until it looks like a weak sunset and he smiled in that crooked way that still makes my chest tilt. It felt absurd and also like proof stamped by very small facts. At the end she stacked our papers so their corners met and said, "We'll update you within 5 working days." We walked out like kids leaving an exam where the questions weren't what you revised for but you did your best anyway. At noon his Slack made that hollow plump from the dining table even though he'd signed out. "We need a quick sync," his manager wrote, and then he followed it with a calendar invite so aggressive it might as well have been a hand on the back of his neck. He stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "I want it in writing," he said, out loud to the room, and joined the call with his jaw set like a door wedged shut. I listened to one side. Words like restructure timeline and brought forward and package. He said I'm on certified medical leave, in that careful voice he uses when the floor feels like a trapdoor. Then, softer, please send final terms by email. He clicked leave and sat very still. The email landed 5 minutes later. Effective today. 1 month salary in lieu of notice. 2 months ex gratia. EP cancellation submitted out. Outplacement services that sounded like a brochure. He looked at me and I had the sudden, stupid thought that people should be allowed to throw glasses at the wall when they read this kind of thing and have someone else sweep it up without looking judgmental. We have an application in, I said, as if the green tick from last week could step between a person and a system like a bodyguard. We logged into the portal with our breath held like it could count as a security step. There it was, pending additional verification. It felt like a sneeze stuck in your face. We called a helpline. A man with kind vowels said the in-principle approval would let him stay while issuance was processed, that cancellation of his EP didn't mean he had to leave, that we weren't about to be turned into pumpkins at midnight. I wrote it down even though I could feel the words like they were tattooing themselves somewhere underneath my collarbone. He sat back. It's not a yes, he said. It's not a no, I said. We made noodles because my hands needed to do a thing they understood. He ate 3 bites and then pushed the bowl away and said, "It tastes like paper. Side effects are orderly like that, unimpressed by your need to feel normal." At 3 a number I didn't recognize called his phone and he moved like someone had pressed pause. He put it on speaker and the voice on the other end said, "Hi Gary, this is Sarah from Samaritans following up because you asked for a check-in if things shifted." He closed his eyes and a tear slid out like it didn't want to make a scene. "Things shifted," he said, and we both laughed in this choked way. She asked if he was safe. He said yes. She asked if he had a plan for the next 24 hours. He said, "I'm going to watch my wife fall asleep on the sofa and then I'm going to pick her up and fail to carry her to bed and then I'm going to brush my teeth with too much force and then I'm going to lie down next to her and stare at the ceiling until it stops being a chessboard." She said, "That's very specific," and he said, "It helps." After, he stood in the doorway and looked at the square of sunlight on the floor like he was committing it to memory. We went back to wth.reddit the next morning because the email told us to. The same officer, same pen, a fresh stack of questions and a new person sitting one chair down taking notes. "We're not doubting your marriage," she said, "this is just timing." I could feel the apology she couldn't say. She asked for pictures older than a month and I hated myself for how many of our Singapore pictures were the two of us with our faces pressed together in a corner like proof and not a lot of us with anyone else. I scrolled back to Snow in his ridiculous beanie and my blue parka and a barbecue where his sister had made fun of us for being those people. I handed over my phone and the officer's mouth did a small, unwilling curve. When we came out, a sheet of rain had glued itself to the sky and there was May under the awning, hair pinned and a line of clips like a spine. She saw us and her face did the thing where the brave part and the sorry part get into an argument. "I heard," she said, "about the consolidation." She said HR had done a town hall that was a funeral with slides. "Half of us are going to Hong Kong," she said. "Half of us are going home." I asked which half she was. She looked out at the rain. "I'm going to my mother's," she said, and laughed without humor. "For now." He didn't cry. He stood there with his hands in his jacket and said, "I'm going to try not working for a minute and see if the ground holds." She nodded like she'd been holding the permission slip and was glad he took it. On the train home, he opened LinkedIn and wrote a post. I watched him the way you watch someone go into cold water. He typed, deleted, typed, deleted, and then left in words that made my stomach tighten with love and fear. "Laid off today mid-medical leave," he wrote. 7 years well, the last 12 months not. I am learning that optics don't matter more than health. If you've navigated redundancy while your brain is trying to rewire itself, I'd value your advice. Also, if you have a role in SG that's okay with boxes and quiet focus, I can do boxes and I can do quiet. He hit post and his hand shook afterwards like he'd just stepped off a ferry in a storm. 10 minutes later, his phone started vibrating in this low, constant way that made the table hum. Old co-workers, strangers, a guy he'd worked with in Calgary who wrote, "I've been where you are. Call me." A woman from a small product studio in Tanjong Pagar who said they didn't care where he sat as long as he shipped and would he talk. An NGO with a name like a soft hand said they were building a resources map for mental health in the region and needed someone to make their CAMS stop falling over. He covered his face with his forearm and made a sound like a laugh that got lost. At 4:03 p.m. my phone lit up, "Your application has been approved in principle." The words were so bureaucratic I could have kissed them. There was a PDF with 12 clauses and 2 boxes you tick to say you won't do crimes and a line at the end that said, in small, stubborn font, "This letter permits the holder to remain in Singapore until the pass is issued." He read it twice and then said, very softly, "We're not going anywhere today. We booked the fingerprinting slot for Saturday morning because mornings are still where our courage lives," and he went to the cupboard and took down the good tea without comment like ceremony. Saturday came in clean and bright like someone had pressure washed the sky overnight. The biometrics office smelled like wet umbrellas and toner. He pressed his fingers to the glass, and watched his prints appear as gray clouds. The camera flashed and the woman behind it said, very cheerfully, "Don't worry, everyone looks like a criminal in these." When we stepped back into the sun, there was a hawker uncle hosing down the floor with that muscular stream of water, and he flicked it just enough to catch our shins and then grinned when we yelped. We ate last at a plastic table that wobbled, and he put the spoon down halfway through and said, "It doesn't taste like paper." I didn't pretend I wasn't crying because sweat makes a good disguise. In the afternoon he had a call with the Tanjong Pagar studio. He sat at the table with his shoulders low and his hands open. They asked about the gap and he didn't flinch. "I can do good work," he said. "Right now I'm doing good work slowly." They didn't hang up. They asked about timelines and he said he couldn't start until his pass was in his pocket, and they said, "Fine, we've lost more time to people lying than we'll ever lose to honesty." When he hung up he put his forehead on the wood like he wanted to learn it by touch. His mother texted again that night, another apology that stumbled around and then found a clear patch. "I am learning," she wrote. "We want to try." He read it and didn't respond for a whole breath and then wrote, "Thank you," which is 2 words and somehow also a very long bridge. His sister sent a video from her car where she shouted Dependence Pass, like she was announcing the winner of a game show, and then added, more quietly, "I'm so proud of how you're both doing this." This morning a card the exact shade of an unripe guava slid out of a machine into his hand. It was heavier than I expected and startlingly warm from the printer, and when he tucked it into his wallet it looked like it had always had a space there. We walked out into a sun that meant it, and he stopped on the steps and put the wallet in my palm like he was offering proof to the universe. "We're staying," he said, and it landed somewhere in my body with a thud that shook something loose. We went home and he lay on the rug and stared at the ceiling fan. He said, "I want to change my vow." I pretended not to be startled. He said, "I want to say I love you on the days I don't love anything, and I want to add, I love you loudly when I feel small." I told him mine has a new line too, about how some days love is a government form with a green tick and some days it's a bottle of water pressed into your hand by a stranger in a pink visor next to dish soap. He laughed and it came out whole. We printed a fresh scan of our marriage cert because bureaucracy is a jealous god, and then turned the tap on and let it run while we stood in the kitchen and breathed. We are not through. The woods are still what they are. But there's a path with our names on it and a card in a wallet that says we get to walk it together, and tonight, when I reached for him, he didn't hesitate. He reached back.